You're listening to the Renegade Blitz Podcast, a podcast for Steelers fans by Steelers fans. Follow us on Twitter at Renegade Blitz, read articles on renegadeblitz.com, and like us on Facebook. Welcome back to the Renegade Blitz Podcast. I'm Ty Polk, joined by Chris Ward. Glad to be here to talk more Steelers football as we get set for Steelers versus Texans this weekend. The Steelers' offensive line has been hampered to begin the season. David DeCastro hurt his knee during a nighttime practice in training camp. His replacement, Stefan Wisniewski, tore his pec, and fan favorite right tackle Zach Banner tore his ACL. Both injuries happened between two plays in the same game against the Giants to open the season. Help may be on the way with DeCastro close to return this week. He practiced on Wednesday. The team has a little bit of a dilemma. The pass blocking against Denver was excellent. The Broncos recorded 1 sack and 3 quarterback hits. However, the run blocking outside a few blips, including that James Conner 59-yard run to ice the game, barely got them over 100 yards. In his Tuesday piece with the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Gary Dulac wrote this factoid. The Steelers are the only team in the league to post 100-yard rushers in the first 2 games of the season. It's clear the Steelers have depth on their offensive line, and having a lot of good linemen is a good problem to have. Chris, how do you think the Steelers will redeploy DeCastro while keeping one of Kevin Dotson or Chuck Okorafor in the lineup?
Well, I think DeCastro practiced today. And if he's good to go, they're going to put him in the lineup, and Okorafor will be right there next to him at right tackle. And Dotson would just be a backup for Sunday, but that's a great option to have if anything goes wrong with DeCastro.
They've even been saying potentially they'll put Dotson in there anyway and just move Filer to the edge tackle position. It's another good problem to have. It's just like there's so many lineup combinations the Steelers can go with.
Yeah, I mean, it depended on what they think is the best matchup to block J.J. Watt, and he moves all over the defensive line. So that could be something they're scheming for. Like last year when they had Aaron Donald, they moved Matt Filer to right tackle to left guard to help combat that.
Well, it was nice to see Kevin Dotson kind of honor Zach Banner with the kneel down guarding that he does there. It was a nice little trick there, and you hope that the Steelers find a way to have him do a little bit more than that. But we'll move on. To follow up with more news, nose tackle Daniel McCuller has terminated his practice squad contract and is now a free agent. McCuller was a 6th-round draft pick for the Steelers in the 2014 NFL Draft. He's spent the last 6 seasons with the team. In 73 regular season games, he recorded 41 total tackles, 2.5 career sacks, 9 quarterback hits, and 2 passes defended. Most of that stat line came in the 2016 season, where he played in all 16 games. With no preseason games, a surprise cut off the 53-man roster, and the surprise emergence of Tyson Alualu at nose tackle, it seems the writing was on the wall for McCullers. Chris, what are your thoughts on McCullers and his time with the Steelers?
Yeah, I mean, his time was, he didn't really do much, since 2014 when he came to Pittsburgh. And he was one of those guys where the media and fans always thought he was going to get cut. But he was always there, he was always brought back. And this afternoon, I saw that he signed with the Bears. I saw a report on Twitter. He is now with Chicago. Other than that, I think, like you said, his time was up in Pittsburgh, and Tyson Alualu taking over that position. They like Carlos Davis, who they drafted. He's on the 53-man roster, rookie.
We'll talk more about the Steelers later on in the podcast. For now, it's time to find out more about the Steelers' opponent this week. To cover this Sunday's matchup and tell us more information about this Texans team, we're glad to have on Drew Dougherty, host of Texans TV. Drew, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me on, guys. Man, you're one of the few people that ever pronounces my name correctly on the first try. So good stuff there.
Well, I'm going to be honest and transparent as a journalist. I had to ask, and that's just
Come on, man. Go with the take the praise. Just have fun with it. Live a little.
I gotta be honest, man. That's how I am. But I appreciate you for putting me over a little bit over there. But
there you go.
Let's get into the Texans here. They've had a really challenging first 2 weeks of the season, going against the defending champion Kansas City Chiefs and the winningest regular season team last year, the Baltimore Ravens. Despite being 0-2, what are some of the positives this season for the squad?
Yeah, it's important. They are 0-2. You don't want to sugarcoat that or anything. They are 0-2, and they got to get a win desperately. But some things that have been intriguing are J.J. Watt's playing like J.J. Watt. Not that anybody doubted that, but he looks just like the same old guy who we saw wreck offenses back in 12 and 13 and 14 and 15 and then 18. When he was injury free. So J.J.'s looking good, and in spurts, when he's played, an outside linebacker named Jacob Martin has been a difference maker too. So you got to think that the snaps for Jacob are going to go up. He's been getting about 20 a game, but I imagine that number will rise because good stuff happens when he's on the field defensively. So I do think those are a few good things you've seen. And then David Johnson on the flip side of things had a good first game, 11 carries, 77 yards. Had about 35 yards receiving, scored a touchdown. Looked like the slippery guy that we, got to see when he was an All-Pro in Arizona. So it looks like he's healthy again and definitely a contributor. So those are some things that have been positives, that have been good to see early on here for the Texans.
And Drew, one of the biggest offseason moves was trading away DeAndre Hopkins. How's that receiver corps been looking with Will Fuller, Brandon Cooks, Randall Cobb, and Kenny Stills, and plus the tight ends they have there?
Yeah, they're still looking and talking about getting chemistry and getting continuity sharpened up. Randall Cobb is one of the guys that the Texans signed this offseason as a receiver. Very solid history there in the slot for Green Bay all those years. Had a good season last year with Dallas. And he said back in May, and I'm paraphrasing this, he said back in May, we all got to get on the same page. It's going to be tougher because there are no OTAs. Then he said that basically again at the start of training camp. And then when he talked to the media last week, he sort of reiterated and said, listen, it's a matter of when, it's not a matter of if, but still working towards getting there. So on the whole, they're definitely not pleased with what they've seen out of the wide receiver spot as far as how things gel. But goodness, once it does, Brandon Cooks had 95 yards receiving last week and made some really nice catches, and he can burn guys. He's a different type of pass catcher. He's still got Fuller. Will Fuller's a number one receiver. He had 100 yards. He's a deep threat, yes, but he is a number one receiver when he's out there. Now, he's got to be out there because he's struggled with that in his career. And then you still have Kenny Stills just hanging around. Very, very productive guy. He's very fast. So all those guys factored in with Cobb, who got a little bit more involved in the offense last week. There's a lot of talent there at the wide receiver spot. So Deshaun Watson and those guys just working on the chemistry, and hopefully that comes a little quicker.
Was Fuller hurt last game? Because I read around there a little bit. He didn't get any targets. The lone spot for him was a handoff on a reverse.
Yeah, it's really weird. He was not listed today on the injury report. There was no listing of an injury last week. Now, people saw him on the sidelines working some things out with trainers, but he was out there, and they wouldn't have sent him out there. That's not their MO. They pull him off if they sense the slightest, malady or injury. So odd. I don't know really how to explain it. I've been around this team since 2009. It was just weird, so we'll see. But he's okay, and that's the key thing. So as long as he's healthy, he's going to draw a lot of attention from defenses, and he's in theory going to loosen things up for the offense, because when he's out there, he's got game-breaking speed, and he's a good catcher of the ball. So this is somebody who's a difference maker and helps your offense immensely.
And let's also talk a little bit about the running backs group. Of course, as you mentioned, David Johnson, who, because I also follow Arizona because they were considered Pittsburgh West, I got to see a lot of him too. But last week he was held under 50 yards from scrimmage with Duke Johnson out due to an ankle injury. First, what's the status on Duke Johnson this week?
Well, he was limited again in practice. That's a big question mark because of his ankle injury. Didn't play him last week, and he left the Kansas City game early. He was really productive for the Texans last year, so you want to see him back in the fold because like good things happened when he was on the field last year for Houston. So still limited. We'll see how limited he'll be in practice, how available he'll be on Sunday. But I know the Texans really wanted to implement a lot of 2-back sets with him, with David Johnson on the field at the same time. Haven't seen that too much from this offense under Bill O'Brien, really, if at all. So that puts a cramp on things. I know they want to get David Johnson the ball a lot more, and they weren't satisfied probably with what they got to him on Sunday. Now, a lot of that is dictated by game situation and what they had to do to get back in the game because they were trailing throughout. But yeah, they want to see more and get more to David Johnson, but they definitely want Duke Johnson back in the fold because essentially they were a 1-back offense without him out there.
When you talk about 2-back sets, are you meaning something from the shotgun in which on one side's Duke, on the other side is David? Like, are they planning a little bit?
Yeah, they've got
like
that. I mean, they've got all sorts of stuff. You've seen the pistol formation, but that's only when one guy's out there. But yeah, they'll split them out. They'll do all sorts of different things with those two guys on the field, looking to exploit a mismatch, looking to get those guys matched up with a linebacker that they think they can, out-juke, outrun, whatever you see. But yes, two guys in the backfield, whether Watson's in shotgun or under center, for sure.
Well, how are the Texans going to deploy Johnson and Johnson if they both play? Melvin Gordon, while he was held in check running-wise, 70 yards, of course everyone's heard about what Saquon Barkley had to deal with Monday night against the Steelers, but still those guys kind of had, all right games in terms of catchers out of the backfield. Is that what Houston seems to be planning?
Well, I don't know about game plan, but you saw it all through training camp. They would go specifically to David Johnson. He was a guy that was very much an outlet for Deshaun Watson during training camp, during the 2 scrimmages that they had in the stadium. So, yeah, they want him to be they want to feed him. They want him to be a big part of the offense, David Johnson. And Duke can catch the ball, too. You guys know this. I mean, he played for the Browns for all those years, and you saw those limited times when he was on the field, he could do some things. So, yeah, they definitely want to get these guys involved. As far as game plan and specifically who they're going to match up with Steelers-wise, that we'll see on Sunday.
And getting to Deshaun Watson, the franchise quarterback there for the Texans, who unbelievable player. He's elusive, and I really like his delivery when he's throwing the ball. But so far, he's been getting sacked a lot. And I read here from Pro Football Focus that the Texans have allowed the most pressures so far this year with 57. How's that been going so far through the first 2 games against the Chiefs and Ravens?
Not good enough. They want to improve on that. It's a collective effort. You hear Bill O'Brien say that all the time. It's not just the offensive line. The offensive line does have to play better, but it also filters out to the backs, filters out to the receivers and blocking the tight ends. And then Deshaun himself. I mean, they want to get the ball out of his hands much more quickly than they have seen him do it in the past few years. So it's got to get better. I mean, and it's tough to say that when you're going up to Pittsburgh and facing that front 7. I mean, goodness gracious. They know all about TJ Watt. I mean, he's somebody that they were excited about the possibility of him maybe becoming a Texan. A year before he even had that great final season at Wisconsin, they just loved his measurables, and they went up to, I don't know who they were observing or scouting. It was in the springtime before the 16 draft, and he still hadn't broken out yet on the field, but they saw him at this workout, and they're like, golly, he's something else. Now, a year later, they were in quarterback prison because they just dealt away Brock Osweiler after a rotten season. So they moved up and they got Deshaun, and they're very, very, very happy with that. But to circle back, I mean, going into that the teeth of that Pittsburgh defense, that's no fun. And you got to shore it up, that pass protection with those guys coming.
Well, nowadays, every armchair GM in Pittsburgh wants to get JJ on the team now, just so we can.
You can't have him. He's ours. Just forget about it. I don't want to hear any of that because he's a Houston Texan, okay?
Hey, in Pittsburgh with the hockey team, we tried to get all the stalls together. Didn't work. Just saying. But of course, on defense, the conversation begins with J.J. Watt, 3-time Defensive Player of the Year. He had 2 sacks against Baltimore. How has he looked this season? Because he's trying to get healthy and stay healthy and all that stuff.
I think he's fine. I think he is healthy, and he's said as much. Looks like the J.J. Watt we all know. I mean, he talked about it this morning. Somebody asked him, hey, what are the similarities between you and TJ? And he said, desire, all that stuff. Bill O'Brien said effort, et cetera, et cetera. And listen, nobody hustles like J.J. Watt. Nobody prepares like J.J. Watt. Nobody has the motor like J.J. Watt. Those are all very true. But you got to combine that and also acknowledge this guy is a big jungle cat. I mean, the way he moves, the athleticism there, I mean, it's a perfect union when you combine that athleticism and all the other stuff as far as want to. He's not just some like lunch pail guy that's gotten there strictly on, grit and determination. He has all those things, but he's a phenomenal athlete, and he looks like the crisp, spry J.J. Watt of what we've seen when he's been healthy out on the field, because he missed those 2 seasons, 16, 17, came back in 18, played the whole year and was an all-pro and double-digit sacks. He was outstanding 2 years ago, and he was on his way to that last year before the injury happened.
And sticking with J.J. Watt, it's going to be the Watt Ball on Sunday with going up against his brother, T.J. and Derek. And, amazing situation where all 3 brothers will be playing in the same game. Obviously going into this game, it'll be a huge storyline with all the media outlets. But, I know, in Pittsburgh, they talk about J.J. a lot, Derek and T.J. And just, down there in Houston, I'm sure J.J. Talks about his brothers also up here in Pittsburgh.
Oh, yeah. It comes up quite a bit. It's always, and he always lights up when he's talking about them. We saw TJ down at the playoff game last year when the Texans came back to beat the Bills. He was going bananas. JJ is a big fan of his brothers, obviously. They talk a lot of trash, as you guys know. I mean, it's hilarious to see the stuff, the back and forths on Twitter, Instagram, all that stuff. So, yeah, he's a huge fan of his bros. And I know he was bummed that his parents weren't going to be able to watch, in stadium, because they were all at the last time at the game when the Steelers were here in Christmas a couple years ago or 3 years ago. But, JJ was in a trench coat because he had suffered that injury, so he wasn't out there. But, yeah, it's going to be fun to see. It's remarkable, man. Can you imagine, A, just having a brother that made it to the NFL, but B, he's a superstar. He's probably going to be in the Hall of Fame. And then, there's another one who's on his way there in TJ. And then you got a third that's very, very productive in his own right, led the NFL in special teams tackles a year ago. I mean, it's remarkable when you just sit back and think about it.
Yeah, and let's talk about the run defense last week against Baltimore. 230 yards last week. Baltimore is one of the more dynamic rushing attacks in the league, really probably the most dynamic the league has ever had in terms of quarterback plus running back play.
Yeah.
What has Houston been looking to shore up that run defense?
Okay, hear me out here. Hear the full thing here. In the first half, they did their job. They only gave up 44 yards. But you got to remember, they were put in very, very rough situations, short field a couple times because of turnovers. And then the dam basically broke after the half, and Baltimore ran away. So now on the whole, yeah, it's bad. But there were signs of improvement. There were signs of life based on what you were able to do in the first half. And it was encouraging. But they kept getting put in bad situations and kept getting put back out on the field. So they've got to find ways to get off the field. They've got to also, on the flip side, the offense needs to stay out there a little bit longer, score some touchdowns, and put the defense in better situations. But yeah, the first week it was tackling. I mean, Bill O'Brien talked about they missed 20 tackles in that game, and they shored that up. They got better as far as tackling went last weekend against the Ravens in the first half for the most part, and to a degree in the second half. But yeah, it's such a dynamic offense, such a dynamic run offense that the Ravens have, and a good chunk of that was on that Ingram touchdown out of the Wildcat. So it's not been fun, but I do think they're taking steps and making progress, and things are going to get better there on that side of the defensive side of things, run defense.
And for the linebackers, I remember last year there was a lot of good things said about the linebackers core, especially Zach Cunningham. He's highly touted there. And he's how have they been looking thus far?
Well, it was kind of like what happened the first week versus second week as run defense goes as a whole. They missed some tackles. They weren't as sure tacklers as they normally are, because that's one thing that McKinney Cunningham in their past they've been sure tacklers. It got better last week. They're still not where they want to be in their own words, but Cunningham, a key part of this defense moving forward, a key part of this franchise. He signed his long-term deal just a few days before Watson did. So, they think very, very highly of him. 2 highest paid linebackers or linebacking duo right now in the NFL as far as the inside backers. So, they've got to keep doing what they're doing and keep progressing and getting better there in the run game.
Yeah, and also the secondary, they have a guy in Bradley Roby who was a former player out in Denver. You have Lonnie Johnson. It was that, Chris. You took it off of you.
Who's the opposite? Is that Hargraves they have there at the opposite starting cornerback?
Hargraves has been getting a lot of time. Garyon Conley is on IR right now. He was a first rounder a few years back, played at Ohio State. Raiders took him. Gruden came in, so the regime changed, the defense changed. Texans sent one of the third round pick that they got in the Clowney deal from Seattle. They sent that to Oakland. Now it's Las Vegas, but they sent it to Oakland last year in exchange for Conley. Conley played pretty well, in that half season, and they were thinking good things were to come, but had the injury, so he's missing some time. They think he'll be back pretty soon. But yeah, Hargraves, who I talked with today, actually did an interview with him. He has been playing, and he's been pretty solid. You got to remember, he was a corner, first-round pick a couple years ago in the draft, a few years back in the draft. So there's talent there, and he was sort of picked up off the scrap heap last year, mid-season from Tampa Bay. So, yeah, it's been Roby. Roby was a surprise signing. They got him for a year initially in 2019, and the rumblings around were that he was going to leave. He was going elsewhere. Well, thankfully, the Texans re-signed him, and it was a bit of a surprise, a mild surprise this offseason, and he's been solid. Did a pretty good job against Tyreek Hill in week 1. Hollywood Brown did not go bananas last week. Did a pretty good job. So Roby has been solid so far through the first 2 weeks and picking up where he left off last year in the regular season with the Texans.
And the safeties with Justin Reed and Eric Murray, how have they been looking?
They've been good, kind of hearkening back to what we were talking about with the linebackers, with the run defense as a whole. Tackling's got to get better. Murray has been solid, plays a lot of nickel corner, basically, and he's a safety. So he had a pass from Mahomes go through his hands on Thursday Night Football. Really could have changed some of the complexion of the game because it was still early on. Texans were still leading in that ball game. So, yeah, he's been solid. He's been a good addition. And you guys brought up Lonnie Johnson. He was a rookie last year as a corner. He's getting a lot of safety play this year. I think they're kind of transitioning him to a degree to play a little bit more safety than normal.
Well, in your opinion, what's the biggest matchup on offense and defense for the Texans?
If he's going to dig a hole and stay on that right side, TJ Watt versus Titus Howard, the right tackle, I think is a big one. As long as they're not moving him around, if you want to pinpoint one, I think Titus is going to have his hands full, and also Laramie Tunsil to a degree if Bud Dupree is on the other side. But Tunsil, he's somebody you don't really need to worry about. He's been excellent there at left tackle. But I would say that Bud Dupree, the Titus Howard, TJ Watt matchup is certainly one to watch. And then where is JJ going to line up? Because they move him around. I mean, you saw him over the nose in week 1 sometimes. He's out wide 9 other times. Then he's in between the tackle and the guard. He'll move around on the front. So whoever he finds mismatch-wise to go up against, you might see him line up quite a bit. So that'll be they both involve the Watt brothers, if we want to boil it down to simplicity. TJ Watt versus Titus Howard of the Texans, and then JJ Watt versus whoever's having to block him on the Steelers.
What do you think is the biggest concern for the Texans? I mean, you already mentioned the pass rush, but is there anything else you can think of?
Certainly the pass pro, to go back to that, but run defense, you guys hit on it too. They've been gouged on the ground the first 2 weeks of the year. Clyde Edwards-Helaire week 1, and then just the Ravens as a whole last week in the second half especially. They got to shore that up. I mean, if they can't get off the field and teams are going to run it well on them, it's going to be a long season. So run defense, getting takeaways is huge. They're tied for next to last in the NFL. They do not have a takeaway as far as turnover differential. Don't have a takeaway. They've coughed the ball up 3 times. They've got to get better in that regard because you're just not going to win if you're staying that far underwater. turnover differential wise.
All right, Drew, our final question. You kind of touched on some of these things, but the Texans will win this game if they do what? And do you have a prediction for the game?
Don't have a prediction because I've learned after like 3 or 4 years, and I've been there 10 years now, anytime I say a prediction, it goes haywire and goes the opposite way. So I have no idea. No idea whatsoever. But I've said this pretty much every week this year. They've got to get 2 more takeaways than the other team. They've got to be 2+2 turnover because if they're doing that, that means they're getting off the field sooner and they're giving that defense a chance to rest and regroup. They're giving the ball back to Deshaun Watson. They haven't done that yet. They haven't gotten a takeaway yet. And so that's what they got. I mean, they just got to find a way to go back to winning that turnover battle. They're outstanding when they do so. Most teams are, but the Texans, particularly under Bill O'Brien, have been just lights out when they've won the turnover battle.
Well, Drew, one final question, at least for me. And here at the Renegade Blitz, we've, in the past couple preview episodes, we've actually been moving up. We went from blogger to radio person, now to an actual part of the team. So, yeah, it's just like we're moving up in the world, even in this young podcast. But I got to ask, because you're a part of a team, how has reporting changed with COVID for you?
Oh, goodness. It's sad, man. My favorite part of my job is game day. And I'm guessing it's probably the same for you guys. Game day is just the pinnacle. Well, I don't travel with the team anymore. This is the first season I haven't traveled with the team. I've only been to Pittsburgh once. And the time I went, I loved it. It was 14, just such a cool town, such a cool environment, the history, the traditions, all that. It's a cool downtown city when I visited. And I'm really bummed that I'm not going. So that's one major change. I didn't go to Kansas City either. So I'm not traveling with the team. I always love going on the road, having the experience and seeing these cities, these towns, these stadiums, the vibe and everything. So mainly game day is different in that regard. I go into my office. Well, I go into the stadium, which is where my office is. We do a pregame show on the website, HoustonTexans.com, which we had before, but we've beefed it up and we do it in studio now. And we call in some guests on Zoom, and it's a good pregame show, but it's just not the same as being there, and then going in the locker room and interviewing guys and being across the radio studio from them in stadium, which I normally have. It's not going on because of COVID. We got to be safe, but it's just, I miss that. I miss that one-on-one. I mentioned I had that Hargraves interview today, did it via Zoom like everybody else, like we're doing this interview. And it was fine. It was a good interview. He had some really good things to say, but you just miss that connection with people and getting to shake somebody's hand, getting to look them in the eye, face to face, be a few feet away. So I've missed that, and that's been the toughest. But listen, I'm gainfully employed. I still have my dream job. I do not want to come across as a whiner because I'm very, very grateful that I get to do what I get to do. But I miss game day and seeing these guys in person and getting to interact with them in person. Those have been the biggest changes for me, COVID-19 wise.
That's Drew Dougherty from Texans TV, the host of Texans TV. Drew, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate you having me on.
Thanks, Drew. We really appreciate it.
Yeah. Best of luck with everything. And when this all ends and we're traveling again, if y'all are down here or I'm up there, let's say hello, okay?
Yeah, definitely. We'll definitely have to.
No doubt.
All right. Thanks a lot, Tyler. Thanks a lot, Chris.
And that was Drew Dougherty, the host of Texans TV. We thank him again for coming on the show. And Chris, with the Steelers, it hasn't been the prettiest at times through the first 2 games of the season. What are your keys to victory against the Texans?
Well, defensively, I feel like I'm saying this every week, but the offensive line for the Texans, they're going to have to block that Steelers pass rush with, Hayward and Tuitt, Alu, and T.J. Watt and Bud Dupree on the outside are, not to be biased, but I think it's pretty much of agreement, I think, with most football fans in the media. I think they're the best duo in the league right now as far as pass rushers. They had 19 quarterback hits, which is amazing against Denver, and 7 sacks. So, and like I mentioned on the podcast that per Pro Football Focus, that the Texans have allowed 57 pass pressures this year, which is the most in the league. So that's something you definitely want to look out for. They've been struggling. Houston, Watson's been getting hit a lot and sacked. So I think it starts all right up there, up front. And then on offense, Steelers they got to be a little bit more consistent and smoother on offense. We saw a lot of fumbles, and Ben had a bad interception there in the third quarter against Denver. So I think they just need to clean up those mistakes. And
and just to talk about the impact the Steelers defense had against the Broncos stats. The Broncos gave up no sacks against Tennessee. Of course, they gave up 7 against the Steelers. They went from having no sacks to allowing the second most sacks in the league, right behind the Houston Texans. So in 1 week, that's how much pressure this team gives you. You can go from the best offensive line in the league to one of the worst that fast. That's just how the Steelers do their thing out here.
Yeah, the defense, you have Mike Hilton coming off the edge, and then you saw Terrell Edmonds with that big 4th and 2 sack late there in the fourth quarter. The Broncos deep in the Steelers territory. They could bring it from all over the place.
Yes, and thanks to footballreference.com for that stat. Well, Chris, your prediction last week, honestly, was pretty close. What was it for the Denver Broncos? I think you were 3 points off for the Steelers and 4 points off for the Broncos. So
the Steelers winning 23-17 last week.
So why not go to the well one more time? What's your prediction this week? Steelers versus Texans, Heinz Field.
I definitely like the Steelers. I know Houston's hungry for a win, going 0-2. Start off the season, but they arguably face the 2 best teams in the league right now in Kansas City and Baltimore. So I think it's going to be a tough test for the Steelers. I think they'll make it close. I don't think it'll be a blowout or anything like that, but I have the Steelers winning. I'll go 24-17 this week. I guess it's kind of similar to last week, but I give the Steelers 1 more point.
Who do you think will be the biggest performer for the Steelers? You can go each side of the ball.
Yeah, I mean, last week I said TJ Watt, and he ended up having 2.5 sacks and 4 quarterback hits, and he was named Defensive Player of the Week. Man, for this week, I'm going to have to go with that pass rush again, Bud and Watt. I think they'll be the key right now, because if they could get after Watson and, sack him, fumble him, force him to throw interceptions, that'll be really key, because if they could block the Steelers' front 7 and you give Watson time back there, he's going to find his open receiver. And he's elusive, too. He could run.
Absolutely. And armchair GMs rejoice. It's the Watt Bowl. Steelers versus Texans at Heinz Field, 1 p.m. on CBS and wherever else you can get the game. That's all for us on this podcast. For Chris Ward, I'm Ty Polk. We thank you for tuning in to the Renegade Blitz. Thank you for listening to the Renegade Blitz Podcast. Follow us on Twitter at Renegade Blitz, read articles on renegadeblitz.com, and like us on Facebook. Our podcast is available on YouTube.